Hey guys, my name is RyanCentral and welcome to something new that I wanted to call VCTV. This is meant to be a short form video going over everything that's happening not only in just Europe and North America when it comes to the VALORANT Champions Tour, but everywhere, all of the regions, Japan, Southeast Asia, Korea, and because we're spreading ourselves quite wide, it is also going to be a little bit thin on some of the details, so do bear that in mind. The whole point of this series is to get everybody up to speed when we go into Masters 2, to know a little bit more about the teams, have their own expectations, and even talk about the points, the system, everything that we've spoken about in previous videos when it comes to the VALORANT Champions Tour, and how it individually impacts some of these teams that are going to be attending Iceland and Masters 2. The inspiration of this video was MSI, which is the split that's happening in League of Legends, and it's very hard to find just video content that's like, these are the, 12 teams that are attending this event, these are the best teams from Europe, this is their story, who's the favourite to win. So I wanted to do that for Masters 2, because obviously you guys probably know a lot about North America and maybe Europe, but Japan, Southeast Asia, who are those teams? What should we know about them, and what are their expectations going into this tournament? Let's start with the most straightforward ones. Let's start with North America, Sentinels, and Version 1, the two teams that qualified and will be attending Masters 2. The last time I tried to record this video it was half an hour, so I'll try and keep this a little bit shorter. I think the Sentinels deserve a little bit more credit than they often get. I know there's kind of like copy-pasta memes on Reddit and stuff, but I think the fact that the scene is so volatile across all of the different countries in a global sense, with new agents coming in, new changes to agents like Viper, the fact that Sentinels have been able to stay on top and have only looked a bit wobbly a couple of times, I think is a true testament to that they are one of the best teams in the world right now, when so many others are really starting to fall off the radar when it comes to their form and their chances of even qualifying for Masters 2, never mind winning it. The Sentinels, they were favourites to qualify for North America, I think most people would agree that, and I do think they're favourites to win this tournament, and I want to briefly talk about why. When you look at teams like FaZe, Gen G, even Envy and 100 Thieves, they looked disappointing in this stage in comparison to Masters and Stage 1. The meta changing, Astra, Viper, all that stuff, as I mentioned, is a big factor. But even then, we've seen Sentinels look kind of poor in some cases. Big examples is that loss to Built by Gamers, that lost against Ambox. But Sentinels have a really good knack of being able to lose the series, kind of look bad when doing so, and then go on a loser's bracket run and win the whole tournament. That isn't easy. We saw teams like FPX in Europe completely fumble after they lost and they couldn't recuperate even with a day's break. Sentinels can just sort of turn it on and know when they need to show up, and the fact that we go into this very unknown environment where, let's say Sentinels play up against Gamelanders, say Gamelanders qualify from Brazil, and Sentinels lose, they're not the kind of team that's just going to bomb out at that point. They will quickly adjust, know what they need to work on, and improve pretty much instantly. And no other team is really that good at doing that. So I think when you put these teams into a volatile environment where anything can happen, Sentinels is going to be the best when it comes to quickly changing and altering stuff that they need to get to grips with, and then coming back stronger. Saiyan style. They get beat down, they come back stronger. And that's why I think they're favourites to win this tournament. It's quite surprising as a European to say that, but I think that when it comes to form in 2021, even though they've lost a couple of times, which every team has at this point, Sentinels look the best right now, and they deservedly earned their qualification spot. There were a couple of cases where, like the Cloud9 series, that's the one I'd recommend to watch if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with Sentinels. If Mitch gets that ninja defuse with 0.02 seconds too late, if he gets that in enough time, I think it's Cloud9 that qualify over Sentinels, and I think Cloud9 win that series. I think Sentinels might still qualify through the lower bracket, as they always do, but you get the point. I think that there are a couple of series where it goes close, but Sentinels always seem to be unfazed by that and come back again into the next series pretty dominant like they did with Version 1. Seeing as I just mentioned Version 1, let's talk about them. Nobody really predicted Version 1 to be the qualifying team. Let's be honest, I know there's some people out there who are like, I knew this all along. More people put Version 1 as the worst team out of the 8 that made the Challengers Finals than said that they were going in for a slot to actually do some work and qualify over teams like Envy, 100 Thieves, and maybe to a lesser extent Exet and Cloud9 Blue. You gotta sort of admire the run that they've been on as well. First game they had was up against Sentinels. They got knocked out to the losers bracket. No second chances from then on out. But then they beat Ambox, NRG, Envy, and Cloud9. They royal roaded it to actually get a qualifying spot. And they looked better and better after each series, similar to what we saw from Sentinels. I think the thing that makes version 1 so special is, certainly when you look at the last day of qualifying, which was Saturday, they had to beat Envy, which they did, and they had to beat Cloud9. They played Haven twice. This is the first composition that they ran. Pretty straightforward when it comes to what they were doing, with Whippy on the Killjoy. And then actually, for the series against Cloud9, which was, I want to say, a couple of hours later, they ran a composition very similar, at least, to what we saw from Team Liquid when it comes to running the Viper on Haven. Not only did they use that, they used a lot of the lineups, they knew a lot of the fundamentals on how the strat worked, and they did this and ran this composition not only after using a different composition a couple of hours earlier, but a couple of days after they saw this composition from Team Liquid. They really have their finger on the pulse when it comes to the meta and compositions, and I don't think they necessarily just take people's strats and comps. They're very good at cherry picking fundamentals and, you know, bringing in the Viper in a series that clearly Cloud9 didn't predict. Cloud9 lost that one 13-5, and that's what I like about version 1, that they're not afraid to experiment, to bring out some zany stuff for North America, and NA is a region I think often gets a lot of flack for being a bit slow when it comes to experimenting, certainly in comparison to Korea, even Brazil now with some of the stuff that they're running, but EMEA is probably the main one when it comes to Viper usage and doing some pretty zany stuff. Before we move on to the other regions, these are actually the circuit points for North America. The teams in purple are the ones that qualified for Iceland, and I've added on the points that they would get even if they came dead last in Iceland, which is 150. So Sentinels got 100 points for winning Masters 1, and they would get at least 150 points if they bomb out in Masters 2. So they're up by a considerable margin, and these also top 2 teams instantly would qualify to the Champions event, which is basically Worlds at the end of the year. The fact that we saw teams like FaZe and Gen G not actually qualify at all for the finals and not getting any points in stage 2 means it's a little bit more volatile. I mean, version 1, just by qualifying for this, get almost double the points of Envy that's just behind them. So all the teams in red also have a qualifying playoff that'll happen. I don't want to get too much into that, but basically whoever qualifies for Iceland out of these regions really runs away with the points that they can get, right? So Sentinels, pretty much unless they really screw the pooch on Masters 2 and do really badly in Stage 3 and don't get any points there, they're looking pretty much confirmed for the Champions event at the end of the year. If they can win Masters 2, well, I'm pretty sure it's confirmed there. But yeah, that's how it looks. FaZe Clan, even though they didn't get any points in Stage 2, are still not that far behind. But it's a nice kick up the ass for some of these teams to do well in Stage 3 and get a couple more points than they maybe got previously. Now let's talk about EMEA. Let's start with talking about Team Liquid, a team that I said wouldn't qualify. And I want to talk about why and what's changed, because I'm happy to admit that I was wrong. I'm happy to change my tune. But there was a distinct difference between what we saw from them in, say, the qualifying game for the EMEA finals, the playoffs, the top 8 teams, which they won against BDS, and their series that they won against FPX a little bit later on. The BDS game, I think my big problem with it overall was the fact that they relied a little bit too much, Team Liquid at least, relied too much on individual clutching out to save that series. They were 1-0 down in the set, and we saw BDS being 11-9 up on bind, but then we saw Team Liquid bring it back, bring it to overtime, win that, and then win the map following. Down to theatrics from Scream, of course, Yampy, and players like Link. I think my problem overall is you can't rely on the savior clutch moments as a game plan and on a consistent basis, right? You're putting players like Link into 1v4s. Most teams are not going to win those, so having those scenarios play out like it did in that BDS series on a consistent basis, just when it comes to percentage-based stuff, is not going to work out. But we saw a huge change in Team Liquid from that qualifying game to the FPX series, where they brought out some really interesting strategies, like I mentioned before, the Viper on Haven, the no duelist composition on this map, and they really took FPX by surprise. I think when we see Team Liquid get to the end game of some of these tournaments, we see the strategy of Sliggy coming out, the aces up his sleeve, at least when it comes to compositions and things that they've been plotting and planning. But also when you have players like Scream and Yampy that are very much used to this, they rose to the occasion. All of Team Liquid rose to the occasion. And I think a 13-0 win against Oxygen on this map in the qualifying game for Iceland really says enough about this ascension that Team Liquid has been on that may continue when we get to Iceland, because these players are used to playing on LAN, and we might see Team Liquid yet again kind of raise themselves to a new level that people might have underappreciated. I'm not going to say that Team Liquid are favourites to win this tournament, but you just never know. Fnatic's an interesting one too, because these are both teams, Team Liquid and Team Fnatic, are both teams that kind of came out of nowhere over the last couple of weeks to not only qualify for the EMEA Challenger Finals, but to qualify for Iceland again. Mostly because of roster moves on Fnatic's part. They dropped Chak and Mo and brought in Durka and Magnum. Two players that just are so good for what Fnatic needed. Durka, very much the best player in the world, I think, at the moment when it comes to the impact and what he's been able to do for Fnatic overall. Not only is he winning a lot of these duels and individually fragging out like crazy, he's also a player that falls in line to the strategy that Fnatic need, but also isn't afraid to improvise and do stuff on his own if things kind of go a bit wobbly, which is something I want to talk about Fnatic overall. Magnum's been a great addition too, and I think overall it's fixed Fnatic's biggest issue of firepower, because both of these players not only frag out a lot, but they also have increased the confidence of players like Boaster and Mystic to do quite a lot of damage themselves as well. Doma is more than happy to play second fiddle to Durka, but even in that last series against Gambit, he was the MVP of that series on Bind. So every player shines when they need to, and we never really saw that before with Fnatic. Mostly because I think Mo and Chak were more team players, and so if you put Mo in the same scenario as Durka can win those fights, but I don't think Mo can, if I'm honest. Just because I think he's so used to the dynamic that's been set up for Fnatic. Durka's not afraid to sort of push his own way of playing, and it's actually fitted in so nicely to Fnatic that Doma is letting Durka be the main duelist and the main tip of the spear for that team. My biggest problem with Fnatic, though, is still what it was before. Firepower has pretty much been fixed for this team. It's a lot stronger, not only for the new players, but the old ones. But mid-rounding, too. Boaster's been very vocal about this in the past and honest about it. Mid-rounding and the improvising when stuff doesn't necessarily go to their plan is an area where they look better on, at least with these roster moves, but they still look weak in some areas. Let's say they're attacking, they go on and execute on the A site, the defending team use an ultimate, or they get a cheeky pick onto a key player of Fnatic. So Fnatic back out, they reset, they try and work the map, but it's their plan B. And their plan B doesn't look as good as their plan A, obviously, but a lot of the time they just kind of fizzle out as the map goes on longer. And when you have teams that like to play nice and slow like FPX do and Gambit did, they can smother you and punish you for those kind of things. So it's still an area where Fnatic look a bit wonky, but they look leaps and bounds better than they used to, and I'm really happy that they qualified, because on this form alone, they deserved it. My only problem, like I mentioned with Sentinels, they lose, they can come back stronger. Fnatic and Liquid haven't really lost in a long while. They've beaten each other, but they've been in like the finals of Challengers 2 and the finals of the EMEA playoffs. Big games, sure, but the seeding's been done. They're more seeding games and prize pool money than anything. It doesn't have too much riding on it, so I don't think Fnatic and Liquid are going to be too upset that they lost those games. So what happens if Liquid go up against version 1, they lose against them, suddenly they might be panicking a little bit. What do they do there? That's the biggest question mark I have about both these European teams that are making it to Iceland, and I hope they can adjust just as fast as Sentinels and version 1 do, because if they don't, they could maybe get embarrassed by some of these other teams. Points on the board, this is what it looks like. Fnatic and Liquid are in the lead, obviously. Even if they bottom out with 150 points, they're bound to get a little bit more, like 200 or so, but this is what it will look like at least. But Gambit isn't that far behind, considering Gambit, got into a qualifying spot. So if Gambit actually do pretty well, qualify for Masters 3 later on this year, they could be in that qualifying spot for first and second place, but they're at least solidified in the playoff spot, which isn't necessarily the same for FPX, Guild, and Heretics, all three teams that are considered top ones in Europe. The fact that Heretics is not even in the top, the top 10, I guess it would be, kind of scary for that team, especially with movements of maybe Coldamenta going to G2 and Nuki and Avova going that way too. It's something that is going to be pretty scary for them going forwards. And FPX, yeah, disappointing. All came down to their own individual performance, and really, Gambit played well. We saw Liquid play well against them too. It was just a shadow of what we've seen from FPX in the past. So a shame, but I hope they can quickly adjust and hit the road again for stage 3. Now we move on to the other regions. We can't talk about South America just yet, which includes 2 teams from Brazil, 1 team from Latin America. Those games are still going on. We haven't got our qualifying teams yet, so we'll talk about those maybe next week if I decide to do more of these. So let's move over to the final region, which is Asia, and talking about the 3 teams of Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia. Starting with Korea, and starting with NUTURN, not Vision Strikers, which has surprised a lot of people. So we could talk about why a little bit. Who are NUTURN? Did they deserve to qualify? The answer for that last question is absolutely yes, because recently we've not seen great stuff out of Vision Strikers. For those, most people will know who they are, but for those who don't know, this is a team that dominated the Korean scene for the longest time, went on a over 100 series win streak, and only lost for the first time mid-April, and then lost again the second time on Saturday. It was Saturday. And they didn't qualify for Iceland because of it. The team that they lost was a team called NUTURN, who have actually been clipping at the heels for Vision Strikers for a lot longer than a couple of weeks. There was a really good series like a couple of months ago where NUTURN almost won it, but Vision Strikers came back. It was a best of 5 series for Masters 1 where Vision Strikers won, and it went to a 3-2 scoreline. Vision Strikers lost split for the first time in that series too. And then April 15th, we saw Vision Strikers lose to a team called F4Q, which, for Overwatch League fans from a long time ago, you might recognize the Astros player. His name is Zunba. He used to be a Diva player and one of my favorite players to watch on that hero. I think the Vision Strikers have been slipping a little bit because the scene is so volatile. I do think the addition of Astra and stuff like that has negatively impacted them. We've seen players like Glow, their IGL and Control played, pick up Astra a little bit, but not to the same level as Zumba for F4Q and also Perry for NUTURN. NUTURN, they deserve to win. They won it 2-0. They did it dominantly, and they won in the final against Damwon Gaming, who I think won Worlds last year in League. They won that 3-0. They won it pretty dominantly, and mostly down to individual players showing up. Allow and Solo were the main ones to keep an eye on for recent stuff for NUTURN, but I think the MVP of this tournament for NUTURN, and just the overall MVP of Stage 2 of Korea at least, is Lakia, who plays a bit of Raze but is mostly known as the Silver. He's leveled up his performance a considerable amount. I'd love to highlight him a bit more in the future. If I was on an analyst desk, I'd find plays to show and stuff like that, which I'll try and do. But yeah, I think NUTURN are the best team in Korea right now. They've looked very consistent. They've only really lost to the likes of Vision Strikers and stuff. But Vision Strikers, I hope this sort of fixes a lot of their issues. Similar to FPX, I hope that this has affected them in such a way that they fix some of the issues that they have, maybe make roster changes if they deem that necessary, and then come back into Stage 3 performing, that we see them also play in Masters 3, wherever that international LAN is going to be. So I think the series that you want to watch for Korea overall is going to be NUTURN versus Vision Strikers for obvious reasons. And I failed to mention ones for EMEA. Probably Team Liquid versus FPX would be the one for that one, and Fnatic versus Gambit, because that was a really good series as well, even though it was 2-0. You get to see me on the desk for that one too, so more the better. Let's talk about Japan. Japan is a region that has been distinctly overlooked by a lot of the Western audience. Very early on, it was considered maybe quite good because Absolute Jupiter, much like Vision Strikers, were the dominant team in form. But now it's moved over to Crazy Racoons, that are not only a team that won Masters 1, but they qualified for Iceland, and they did it again in pretty good fashion. What series would I recommend watching? Probably the Grand Final, but they did play Absolute Jupiter twice in the Grand Final and the Upper Bracket Final, so kind of take your pick, to be honest. I think Grand Final's probably better because you see a bit more of the map pool. But Crazy Racoons were a team that really came into form at the start of 2021 as VCT started. They do have an import player from Korea, which again, if you're an Overwatch League fan, you might recognize the name. It's good old Munchkin that's been playing on this roster. But the majority of it is predominantly Japanese, and yeah, they've looked like the best team in the region for quite some time. They're on a 6-win streak, and I think they're going to be grossly overlooked by a lot of the Western audience for Masters 2. Are they likely to be worse than NUTURN? Probably, but I don't think they're super far behind overall. It really, again, depends on how they adjust with agents like Astra into their pool. We didn't see all that much of it, I suppose, overall. Absolute Jupiter were a bit more experimental with the Yoru and the Viper, for example. So I think that's what I want to see out of Crazy Racoons going into Iceland, is a bit more of that Viper, a bit more of that Sky, which we saw Munchkin flirting with a little bit, but the Astra, mostly. I think Astra's too good to not play, unless we see some nerfs coming in beforehand, which I don't really expect to happen. Is this going to be a team that wins the tournament? Probably not, but I don't think that you should be assuming that this team is going to bomb out at the bottom. I think they could do quite well, and I guess we'll see over these next couple of weeks how they can work out. So now let's talk about Southeast Asia as the final one, and let's talk about X10 Esports. This is the team that people are just going to assume is going to be the bottom of the barrel for Masters 2, which I don't think is fair, and I think they could actually surprise a few people. Southeast Asia is a weird region. I've casted it before in 2020, and it was all over the place, but it mostly came down to two teams. Attack All Around and AHQ Esports, both of which have disbanded. Attack All Around disbanded in December, and AHQ, I think, in January, before the VCT even started. And in that week, we saw X10 Esports kind of come out of the rubble in the Thailand scene, and they came in and did some absolute work when it comes to what they've been able to perform at. The most impressive thing is that all of these players came from different rosters to come together for X10. It wasn't like they were all part of Made in Thailand and moved over. The one player that did move from Made in Thailand is another one that Overwatch players will recognize, Patipan, who was a Thailand player that played in the World Cup and was just a really young talent that was too young to play in the Overwatch League. So here he is, absolutely dunking on people in Valorant. 16 win streak for these guys. They won Masters 1, they won Masters 2 without dropping a map. They drew once, but the last time that they lost was February. This is the team that's on the best form at the moment. And I think that when I was saying about consistency and all of the stuff changing for teams like in Europe and North America, the fact that these guys are doing as well as they are with all of that happening in a region that is a lot of different island countries, you know, Malaysia and all that jazz, it's really impressive to see these guys doing this well, and I think that people are going to overlook them, and I don't think they would. I think that this is another team that you would assume that would bottom out, but I think that they're middle of the pack at least, and I can see them, you know, maybe taking a series of some of the bigger teams, I'll be honest, because these are not bad players. Southeast Asia used to be very all over the place when it came to compositions and playstyles for sure. In other tactical shooters like Counter-Strike, they were known for that. But yeah, this is a team that is playing the Astra, playing the Viper, playing the Sky, playing a bit of Breach. The Asia region overall is just very good at kind of what I mentioned about version 1, taking the fundamentals of other regions and just taking the best of North America, the best of Europe. There's a really good video from Anders talking about this, and I think that's even more true with X10 Esports. But the best thing is when we get to the points, as I'm showing you, all three of the major regions that make up the APAC qualifying spot, X10 is leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. 270 points if they bottom out even at Masters 2. There's no way, I think, unless they really, really do badly in Stage 3 for Boom Esports, Team NXL to take a spot for qualifying to Champions. So if X10 do okay, they'll probably be the first team to be confirmed for the Champions event at the end of the year. NUTURN in Korea, it's very close with Vision Strikers. Only one team gets that instant qualification from Korea, which is mad. But NUTURN, if they can, you know, get like a top 4 finish in Masters 2, can do a lot of good stuff here. And Crazy Racoons, because they won Masters 1 and Masters 2, they're double the points of Absolute Jupiter. So X10, Crazy Racoons, more likely names that you should get accustomed to because we might see them at the Worlds event at the end of the year. More than likely. Like I said, we're not going to talk about South America because those qualifiers aren't done yet. But yeah, these are all of the points on screen of all of the regions so far. And like I said, Sentinels, Fnatic, Liquid could seek to gain more points in Masters 2, but this is what they would get at the very least. That is the end of this video. It was a lot longer than I assumed it would be, but we had a lot to get over. And it's also good practice for me to be on an analyst desk and talk and give narrative and talk about what I think of some of these teams. But I think that Japan and Southeast Asia are being grossly underestimated. Japan maybe sort of lives up to that a little bit, but Southeast Asia with X10, I think they can maybe do some pretty good stuff if left to it. Let's see, though. That's my spicy take for next time. But until then, I'll see you soon and take care.